welcome to our 7-week small group series as we unpack what it means to practice the way of Jesus. We are so grateful you're here. My name is Stuart.
And I'm Ashley.
And we lead the downtown region of the Boston Church of Christ. And as we think about this idea of practicing the way of Jesus, we have the luxury of knowing who Jesus is and the man he was, how he lived, how he died, and how he resurrected. But if you were a Jew just seeing Jesus in the synagogue, the first thing that would come to mind is that he was a rabbi. You know, actually, when Jesus was spoken to, he was referred to as a rabbi over 60 times. Many Christians talk about this idea of being a follower of Jesus, but in Jesus' times, the implication of being a follower to a rabbi was completely different than what we think of when we think of a social media follower or something like that. You know, let's look at a few passages as we discover what it means to practice the way of Jesus. In Matthew 4, verse 18, it reads, "As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. 'Come follow me,' Jesus said, 'and I will send you out to fish for people.' At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him."
In Matthew 9, verse 9, it says, "As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. 'Follow me,' he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him."
In Mark 3, verse 13 through 19, Jesus goes on and it says, "Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they may be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority and to drive out demons."
In Matthew 16, verse 24, it says, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?'"
You know, the word that keeps coming up is Talmud. You know, in the Hebrew, it means a disciple, a follower, a student, an apprentice. Discipleship was the pinnacle of the Jewish education system. There was really 3 levels. The first was more like grade school. It's called Bet Shefer, and it's the house of the book is a direct translation, where they would memorize the first 5 books of the Old Testament. I mean, imagine by 12 years old knowing the first 5 books by memory. Then after that, the women would go and get married and have children, and the men would go and be an apprentice to their father to learn the family craft. But the best of them would go on, and they'd go on to a school called Bet Talmud. It's the house of learning. And from 12 years old to about 14 or 15 years old, you would memorize the rest of the scriptures in the Old Testament. And I mean, it's just amazing what they were able to retain as these children or these teenagers. But so they would memorize the Old Testament, and everyone was pretty much done there, except for the absolute elite. I mean, the pinnacle, the most Ivy League, if you will, the Harvard of us all, the MITs of us all, would then go on to the next step. And what they would do is they would try and be a Talmud. They would try to be a disciple of a rabbi. And the process was basically that they would come in to have an interview with a rabbi, and he would be grilling them. What's your perspective on this? And, you know, the idea in Genesis of the Nephilim and half angel, half man. What's your perspective on that? And who are you a disciple of the train of thought in those ideas? And if they passed the test, the rabbi would finally, after vetting them, would say, "I would like you to now come and follow me. I'd like you to come and be my disciple." You really had 3 main goals now as this Talmudim to the rabbi of what you were trying to accomplish in being this apprentice. The first thing is to be with your rabbi. Just be in his presence. Follow him around. You know, there was an old adage, a blessing, a Hebrew blessing that was said many times over, "May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi, right? They didn't have paved roads in the same ways. And so they would go, this blessing on the apprentice would be, if you really are following him the way you need to be covered in the dust, that the cloud behind him, the plume of dust behind him, because you're so in step with what he's doing. And so that was the first calling. You need to be with him and spend time with him. The second goal is to become like your rabbi, to make, the ways that you talk, the way that you act, the way that you dress, the way that you perceive situations, that you are going to become just a carbon copy of your rabbi. An interesting note in the passage we just read of Jesus when he called out to those men to come and follow me. They were already fishermen, and he called them, and sometimes we miss the idea that he wasn't just playing off them being fishermen, although I think that probably had something to do with it. But there was an old saying in the Hebrew culture of rabbis that were like a total rock star rabbi, an incredible teacher of these concepts, would be called a fisher of men. And the reason they'd be called a fisher of men is because they capture the hearts and the minds of all who are listening. And so in the same way, Jesus is telling them, it would have been something that they knew what that meant to be a fisher of men. I want you to leave your fishing nets, come follow me, even though you may not have made the cut to go to the Harvard of the education system. I want you to follow me, a rabbi, and I'm going to help you learn how to capture men's hearts, capture women's hearts, and you're going to change the world with me. It's a completely new way of looking, but what he's saying is, I want you to come and do what I do. This is what I'm doing as a rabbi, is I'm capturing the hearts of people. I want you to have the same impact, the same effect. And so they would expect themselves to be a carbon copy of the rabbi that they were following. The third thing is to do what he did, right? To not just be with him, not just be like him or try to understand the things that he's teaching and understand the way he thinks, but now I've got to go and in turn do what he does. How do we apply this to the 21st century? How do we apply this to our lives? We do the same thing that they did with a rabbi. The first thing is we have to be with Jesus. We have to order our lives to be with Christ, to practically spend time with him, to invite him into our lives, to invite the relationship with Jesus, the Spirit of Jesus, into our daily lives.
Jesus talked about, I'm going to leave my Spirit with you. And so that is how we're able to follow Jesus now in our lives as we're living out our lives. The primary goal of apprenticeship to Jesus is living in a constant state of awareness of and connection to the Spirit. So what we need to do, I think a lot of us spend time with God in the morning, and then we kind of leave him at home and go throughout our day. What this is talking about, if we're going to actively be with Jesus throughout our day, it's that he comes with us, that he's driving, that he's in traffic with us. He's in your office if you work. He's with your kids in the home, or if you're a teacher, that he is right there with you. Just as the rabbi, kicking up the dust of his apprentices, that we are the same way, that we're walking so closely with Jesus, and that there's a consciousness of, I'm gonna meditate, I'm gonna breathe, I'm gonna connect and recognize the presence of God as we go throughout our day. I think is so important.
A passage that brings this to life is in John 15, verse 4. It says, "Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me." As we look at this passage, Jesus is talking about this concept of being with God, being with him, being with his Spirit. He brings up this analogy and this metaphor of a branch, right? As you think about a branch coming out from a tree, it is so much a part of that tree. It's the same way with this concept of spiritual practices. If you've ever heard of the idea of fasting, or in the Old Testament, Sabbath, right? And we, as a family, have started to involve Sabbath into our lives with our kids. And it has truly revolutionized the way that we even think about our week. Or the practice of silence and solitude, or reading our Bible and praying in the morning or in the evening time. All of these practices are moments in time to stop and acknowledge it's time to be with God. I am actually with God right now, but I haven't noticed it, and let me pause. Let me slow down. Whether it's what she talked about of being in traffic or just at home, being able to say, God is here, and I know you've been here the entire time, but I'm finally acknowledging you and recognizing that this is time and space for me to slow down and be with Jesus. If we're going to practice the way of Jesus, it's going to require us to be with Jesus. Yeah. The second thing is we've got to become like Jesus. You know, our goal as an apprentice is to become like our rabbi, Jesus. It's the reality of discipleship or of followership is to imitate and become like the person that you're trying to follow. Now, we in the independent culture can feel like, I don't know if I necessarily have anyone that I'm following. I'm my own man, or I'm my own person. And we know that is really not very true at all. We're a compilation of a lot of different influences in our lives that we have over time become the person that we are. And so no one can say, I don't have any influencers, I'm my own person. It's just more of a question of who is influencing you. Who are you a disciple of? You may say, oh, I know I'm not a disciple of Jesus, but who am I a disciple of? Is it your boss? Are you a disciple of some podcast person or on a YouTube personality or a celebrity? Are you a disciple of your parents and you saw the way that they lived their lives and you thought that worked out pretty well for them, and so maybe I'm going to do more of the same? You see, apprenticeship is not a bad thing, but the ultimate apprenticeship that we should be living out in our lives is to become like Jesus Christ. If you think about the trajectory of your lives, the next 10, 20, 30 years into the future, where will you be? Will you be more like Jesus?
And if we want to become more like Jesus Christ, it's going to take a transformation. You know, I don't know if you've ever tried to cut back on eating certain things, but there's a detox that happens that, you know, Stuart a couple years ago, and then he redid it again recently, tried to go off caffeine, and his doctor...
I didn't just try, I did get off caffeine.
But I can't tell you the headaches, the mood swings, the, honestly, depression that he fell into.
It's true.
But once you get off of it, you do become a different person. You know, for me, different times I've cut out sugar from my diet, and there is a lethargy that I cannot describe. Like, it's just your whole body doesn't know how to be. But it's the same thing when we're trying to transform and be like Jesus. There are parts of you that are going to have to kind of leave you in order to take on the qualities of Christ and be more like Jesus.
Yeah, it takes practice, right? This is not something that's going to happen overnight. Transformation never happens overnight. It is a process that takes time to be able to reorient who you are, and there's going to be some pain involved, like there is with any transformation that we're trying to have in our lives. It's not going to be overnight, but it is going to require deliberate effort.
Yeah.
The first thing, can you guys remember it? It's to be with Jesus. The second is to become like Jesus. And the third goal of us as apprentices to our Rabbi Jesus is to do what Jesus did. So we want to be with Jesus, we want to become like Jesus, and we want to do what Jesus did. Jesus was a rabbi, but we know that he wasn't just a rabbi, right? He was a Messiah, a Savior. He is God in the flesh. And our goal is not just to understand the Bible. It's not just to learn more scriptures like the Jewish culture where they memorized 5 whole books or the entire Old Testament, but instead it's for us to partner with God, ushering in the kingdom of God and establishing his kingdom on this earth. And that's what it's going to mean for us to be and do the things that he wanted us to do, that he is practicing and showing us how to do. You know, as you break down, what did he actually actively do while on earth? We came up with 10 things that we read in Scripture. You may come up with more, but, you know, it was preaching the gospel, teaching the way to live your life, healing the sick, casting out demons, eating and drinking with people far from God, doing justice peacemaking, praying, right? Prophesying. He would go on and constantly was standing up to the religious leaders and the religious corruption of that time and how they misused or tweaked passages of the Old Testament to be able to cause people to have more burdens on them or more tax that they were paying. He was doing a lot of different things. And so if you are going to practice the way of Jesus, it's not just being with him, right? It's not just becoming like him, but it's doing what he actively did. And as we go throughout these next 7 weeks, the next 6 weeks together, it's going to require you to really look inside. What is going on in my own heart when it comes to what are my obstacles to being with Jesus, to become like Jesus, to do what Jesus did? What are the things that are getting in the way of me having deep connecting times with Jesus? Or maybe for you, it's, I don't even know what it means to become like Jesus and do what Jesus did. And I'm glad you're here. You came to the right spot. And we're going to talk a lot about that. But this doesn't work if it's just a hobby. It has to be the whole point of your life. You don't have to just quit your job, but you also need to make this the focal point of your life. And so as we talk about these things over the coming weeks, I want to encourage you that this is not something that is going to happen overnight. This is going to take some time, and that is perfectly okay. And in fact, you also, just like my detox or my diet, you need people in your life. Yeah. Right? We need the community around us to help us practice. You ever try to work out or get back into the gym and do it by yourself? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And maybe it starts out for a while, you doing well, but instead of it going on for a lifetime, it becomes something where you go, man, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. Yeah. Lifestyle of practicing the way of Jesus takes community, and we're so happy that you're here. God is calling us to follow him and to be this Talmudine, to invite you into a relationship with him, so much more than you maybe have ever expected.
What's interesting is that Jesus assumes this will take a lifetime of practice. Yep. It's not about trying, let me just try to be a better person. Let me try to be like Jesus. It's not about trying, it's about training. And, we're not talking about white-knuckling it, but training to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did. For some of us, we've had kind of this pie in the sky, by the end of my life, I want to run a marathon. I've thought about it. I so do not like running, but wouldn't that be cool if by the end of your life you could say, you know what, I ran a marathon. Stuart's thought about it before. Not for me.
I've thought really long and hard about it.
Say I did. You know what? I really want to run a marathon. Yep. For me to decide that, it wouldn't be just waking up tomorrow and saying, okay, I'm going to try really hard to run a marathon. Say I'm going to put on my running shoes, I got my headband and everything ready to go. Totally. I'm going to try my best to run a marathon. If I start running, I may make it to 2.5, maybe 3 miles before I just pass out or end up in the hospital if I went any farther than that. But, running a marathon, anyone that has knows it's about training. Yeah. Right now, I cannot do it. It is not within my human capacity to run a marathon. But week by week, if I start running and I say, okay, 2 is my max, if week by week I add 1 mile, then months from now, I'll be able to get up to 20, 21 miles with just running because of the training. It had nothing to do with me just trying harder. It has everything to do with training. And for me as a disciple, if I'm going to try to be this apprentice of Jesus, it's not about me trying harder. It's about me training every day, all of these moments throughout the day to at some point say, okay, by the end of my life, I am more like Jesus. I am ready to do this.
Yeah, I love this idea of it's not trying, it's training, because it's tangible. It's something that we can do and put in practice today, tomorrow. It's something that we can actually actively live out in our lives. It can feel almost like a mountain to run a marathon. The first marathon, I don't know if this is mythology or this is real, but the first guy to run a marathon died at the end of the 26.2 miles. He was a messenger from the front lines of battle, and the story goes that he got there, handed the letter, and then keeled over and died. I don't want to die in my quest to be this apprentice of Jesus. I don't want to try to be an apprentice of Jesus and then run out of steam too quickly. And so that's what these next 6 weeks are going to be all about. We couldn't be more grateful that you're here, that you're with us, to study out what it means to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did, to really practice the way of Jesus. Now at this time, you're going to have a discussion in your small group to follow up with some questions about what we just talked about. See you next week.